Hi everyone, we're talking about infection control today. This is one of the most fundamental things in all of aesthetics, and most importantly, important on your state board practical exam. Above anything else, above your technique, or anything else that you do on your exam, the number one thing they're looking at is making sure that you know your infection control procedures. Safety and sanitation is key. And of course, then beyond your state board exams, in life and on the job as well, it's utmost importance that we make sure we're properly sanitizing our instruments, our area, everything in the treatment room in between clients to make sure that it's safe for everybody. And as we're going to learn, there's lots of infectious diseases that can be spread otherwise. So let's get right into it. In this chapter, we're going to learn how to explain infection control, describe federal and state regulatory agencies, recognize the principles of infection, identify different types of pathogens, employ the principles of prevention, follow standard precautions to protect yourself and your clients, and demonstrate safe work practices and safety precautions. Why study infection control? It's important to know about the pathogens professionals and their clients may be exposed to and their modes of transmission. Understanding and practicing proper infection control within the laws and regulations will help safeguard professionals' health, the health of their client, and their business. Practicing safety precautions on a daily basis protects their clients and their license. A responsible beauty professional is conscientious about infection control and safety. So what is infection control exactly? Infection control refers to the methods used to eliminate or reduce the transmission of infectious organisms from one individual to another. This can occur through the use of contaminated implements, tools, or equipment. It is your responsibility as a beauty professional to use proper and effective infection control methods that help safeguard your health and the health of your clients. You are also responsible for employing safe work practices to help prevent accidents and injuries from occurring in the workplace. And here are some different levels of infection control. We have cleaning, sanitizing, disinfecting, and sterilizing. And these words do not all mean the same thing, so let's break these terms down. Cleaning is a mechanical process using soap and water or detergent and water to remove all visible dirt, debris, and many disease-causing germs. Cleaning also removes invisible debris that interferes with disinfection. Sanitizing is a chemical process for reducing the number of disease-causing germs on a cleaned surface to a safe level. Infection control professionals consider sanitation to be a layperson's term or a product marketing term, such as hand sanitizer, preferring cleaning to describe the step before disinfecting. Disinfecting is a chemical process for use with non-porous, and non-porous means anything that is solid, doesn't have any holes or openings. So let me give you an example of something that is porous versus non-porous. Something porous would be a sponge. So you can never reuse a sponge. Something else porous would be a cotton round or an aesthetic wipe, aka a 4x4. Those are single-use items is what we call them. You use it on one client and always throw it away. That is a porous object, and anything porous cannot be properly and thoroughly disinfected. Non-porous items would be your metal comedone extractors, tweezers. You can disinfect fan brushes. You can disinfect your hard surfaces like your hot towel cabinet, your aesthetics cart, etc. On non-porous items that uses specific products to destroy harmful organisms, including bacteria, viruses, and fungi, except bacterial spores, which we'll talk about in a second, on implements and environmental surfaces. And lastly, sterilizing is the process that destroys all microbial life, including spores, with the use of an autoclave. So let me explain this a little bit because we have a few new terms that you might not be familiar with yet. So when you're practicing infection control, these things have to be done in order, and we've learned now that sanitizing is just kind of like a layperson's term that they use for kind of relating to disinfection or a hand sanitizer, for example. So I'm going to discuss cleaning, disinfecting, and sterilizing. You have to do these things in order or else it will not work. For example, if we go straight to the disinfection step, which for us would be placing our implements in Barbicide, which is our strong disinfectant solution for our tools. If we've done so without first cleaning our products, we would be putting our implements in there and it would have the person's blackheads on there or mask left over from the product. So you first have to clean all visible debris physically and mechanically with soap and water. That's what the cleaning step is. Then we disinfect and then we sterilize. So let's talk about bacterial spores because that might be a new term for you. Bacterial spores are a dormant form of bacteria that are incredibly resistant to heat and other disinfectant solutions. So the only true way to actually sterilize something is using a sterilizer or an autoclave. That is true sterilization, where you've killed everything, including bacterial spores. In aesthetics, it's acceptable to go up to the level of disinfecting, whereas you do have the option to sterilize, and a lot of people, myself included, we will go ahead and sterilize our implements after disinfecting, and then there's another benefit to that is then they're then placed in an airtight storage pouch to keep other germs or particles or dust from the air from touching them. So there is a benefit to it, but sterilizing, that is usually a step taken by hospitals or any medical settings. Federal and state regulatory agencies. Federal agencies set guidelines for the manufacture, sale, and use of equipment and chemical ingredients. They also monitor safety in the workplace and place limits on the types of services you can perform. Now we're going to list a couple of federal agencies, starting with OSHA, which stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It is going to be important for test purposes that you know what OSHA stands for. Occupational Safety and Health Administration. OSHA standards address issues relating to the handling, mixing, storing, and disposing of products, general safety in the workplace, and your right to know about any potentially hazardous ingredients contained in the products and how to avoid these hazards. An SDS, or Safety Data Sheet, is a 16-category standard format document required by OSHA for all chemical products. And we will learn more about this in the coming chapters, but a safety data sheet, basically any skincare product you use or any chemical disinfectant solution you use, any chemical in your whole spa or treatment room, if it's from a reputable brand, it should come with a safety data sheet, and you're actually required to keep those on hand in your space. So you can put them in like a safety data sheets binder, and they're supposed to be in the immediate work area in case State Board were to ever come by and do an inspection. But listed in there are any hazards, any possible allergies, the ingredients, the proper usage, etc. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. The EPA registers all types of disinfectants sold and used in the United States. Disinfectants are chemical products that destroy most bacteria, excluding spores, fungi, viruses on surfaces. Before manufacturers can sell a product for disinfecting surfaces, tools, implements, or equipment, they must obtain an EPA registration number that certifies that the disinfectant, when used correctly, will be effective against the pathogens listed on the label. So the EPA registers disinfectants. Remember, EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, registers disinfectants, like our Barbicide or our Cavicide. So we've talked about a couple of federal agencies. Now we're going to talk about state agencies. State agencies regulate licensing, enforcement, and your conduct when you're on the job. It includes licensing agencies, state boards, commissions, and health departments. So, for example, DPOR, which is what we go through to obtain our aesthetics licenses, that is a state board, and that falls under state regulatory agencies. And something about aesthetics is that the requirements vary from state to state. So it's not federal, it's not a nationwide, one-size-fits-all type of thing. Every state has different requirements as far as the hours you spend in school, and what's on the test, etc. Enforcement of these rules through inspections and investigations of consumer complaints is also part of an agency's responsibility. Penalties vary and include warnings, fines, probation, and suspension or revocation of licenses. Laws and rules, what is the difference? Laws or statutes are written by both federal and state legislators to determine the scope of practice, which is what each license allows the holder to do. You're going to hear scope of practice a lot in this course. And again, our scope of practice, that is just what is outlined under our license, what we are allowed to do. For example, estheticians, we're allowed to do facials. We are not allowed to do permanent makeup unless we have additional licensing for that specific thing. So you might hear me say that's out of your scope of practice at some point. That just means that estheticians aren't allowed to do that with the specific license we hold. Rules, on the other hand, and regulations are more specific than laws. Rules apply laws by establishing specific standards of conduct and can be changed or updated frequently. It is the beauty professional's responsibility to be aware of any changes to the rules and regulations and to comply with them. Ignorance of the law is not an acceptable reason or excuse for noncompliance. Recognize the principles of infection. Being a beauty professional is not just rewarding, it's also a great responsibility. One careless action on the job could cause injury or infection, which is the invasion of body tissues by disease-causing pathogens. If your actions hurt a client or make them ill, you could lose your license or ruin your salon, spa, or barbershop's reputation. Prevention begins and ends with you. Effective infection control also influences the professional image of your establishment. A client's first impression begins the moment they open the door, so a clean environment should extend beyond each professional's immediate work area. All of the sights, sounds, smells, and textures of the salon, spa, or barbershop meld together to form this first impression, regardless of the number of times a client has previously visited. A clean and orderly business helps build client confidence and trust that continuous care is being taken to provide a safe and sanitary environment in which to receive personal services. Modes of transmission. In other words, this is how transmission happens and how disease or infection is spread. Transmission is the process by which pathogens move between individuals and objects. This is the first step in how we get sick. And there's a couple different kinds of transmission, starting with direct. Direct transmission is what we most commonly think of in terms of getting sick, as it involves the transmission of pathogens through touching, kissing, coughing, sneezing, and talking. Indirect transmission occurs through contact with an intermediate contaminated object, such as a razor, extractor, nipper, or an environmental surface upon which the pathogen resides. Airborne transmission, or respiratory droplet, are similar in that the transmission occurs when a pathogen living in our respiratory tract is expelled through coughing, sneezing, or even talking. Airborne transmission particles are smaller and hang in the air longer. Respiratory droplets can be more effectively controlled by simply wearing a mask. So those are your three modes of transmission. So just to recap, direct transmission, a great example is shaking hands. So somebody's sick, you've shook their hand, that's direct transmission. Indirect would be a sick person touches a doorknob, you later touch that doorknob, and you've caught whatever illness they have. Airborne transmission, say somebody sneezed in the general vicinity where you are, and you obtain your illness that way. That is airborne and respiratory droplet. You should know how to look for specific things on the label of any product you use for disinfection in the salon or spa. It should always have the following: a list of pathogens against which it is effective, and should include HIV, HPV, and MRSA. We will learn about these different bacteria and diseases in just a moment. EPA registration number. The words bactericidal, virucidal, and fungicidal, that means that it protects against bacteria, viruses, and funguses. It should also have mixing and changing instructions. In other words, most of your disinfectants come in the form of a concentrate. A concentrate means you actually have to mix it with water to dilute it. Barbicide is a great example. You use largely water and then a smaller portion of the actual barbicide in order to make your solution. And it should have instructions with ratios of product to water, and also how often to change your solution. At a minimum, disinfectants used in salons and spas should be bactericidal, virucidal, and fungicidal. Be sure to mix and use these disinfectants according to the instructions on the labels so that they are safe and effective. In some states, disinfectants may still need to be effective against tuberculosis. Check your state board rules and regulations for compliance information. Preventing transmission through infection control. An infectious disease is caused by pathogenic or harmful organisms that enter the body. Cleaning and disinfecting procedures are designed to prevent the spread of infection and disease. Prevention 101. In general, the risk of infection can be greatly reduced with a few simple steps. Eliminate pathogens through proper hand washing, cleaning, and disinfection. Clean and disinfect tools and equipment after every service. Keep your skin intact to reduce portals of entry for bacteria. So for example, if you have a cut, that is a portal of entry for bacteria. Be prepared to turn away clients who show signs of illness. Personal habits. Make a habit of following the rules of proper cleaning and disinfection, both in your home and at work. Hand washing, cleaning, and disinfection are all ways in which you can personally combat the spread of disease and safeguard your health and that of your clients. Identify different types of pathogens. When a disease is capable of being spread from one person to another, it is said to be a contagious disease, also known as a communicable disease. Some of the more prevalent contagious diseases that prevent a beauty professional from servicing a client are the common cold, ringworm, conjunctivitis, which is pink eye, and viral infections. These infections are most often spread through dirty hands, especially under the fingernails and in the webs between the fingers. When it comes to preventing the spread of infectious disease, beauty professionals must understand and be prepared to deal with the 5 types of potentially harmful organisms: bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, and biofilms. Additional terms related to disease. Contamination is the presence or the reasonably anticipated presence of blood or other potentially infectious material on an item's surface, or visible debris or residues such as dust, hair, or skin. So, for example, once we have used an item on a client, it is then contaminated and needs to go through the infection control process of cleaning and disinfection. Decontamination is the opposite. It's the removal of the blood or other potentially infectious materials on an item's surface and the removal of visible debris or residues such as dust, hair, and skin. Diagnosis is a determination of the nature of a disease from its symptoms and/or diagnostic tests. Federal regulations prohibit salon professionals from performing a diagnosis. So that is something that I would say is out of our scope of practice. I told you you'd hear me say that a lot. Diagnosing of any kind is out of our scope of practice. This will come up more in later chapters as we move forward, But for example, we learn about many different skin conditions, like actinic keratosis, sebaceous hyperplasia, all kinds of different things, even skin cancers. So we can be pretty certain that somebody has a certain skin condition, but we are not allowed to diagnose them. Even with something like rosacea, we can be pretty certain that it's rosacea, but we would have to direct them to their doctor or dermatologist for an actual diagnosis. And germs is a non scientific synonym for disease producing organisms. An occupational disease is an illness resulting from conditions associated with employment, such as prolonged and repeated overexposure to certain products or ingredients. So, occupational disease is exactly what it sounds like. You get it at your occupation, at your job. Parasitic disease is a disease caused by parasites such as lice and mites. A pathogenic disease is a disease produced by organisms such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. And toxins are various poisonous substances produced by some microorganisms. Bacteria. Bacteria are single-celled microorganisms that have both plant and animal characteristics. You're really going to want to memorize this first sentence here. They are single-celled microorganisms that have both plant and animal characteristics. A microorganism is any organism of microscopic or submicroscopic size. Bacteria can exist almost anywhere, on skin, in water, in the air, in decayed matter, on environmental surfaces, in body secretions, clothing, or under the free edge of nails. And that's why we keep our nails short in aesthetics, because the free edge of nails, which in other words is the portion of your nails that extends past the tip of your finger, that is a place where bacteria can easily hide. Bacteria are so small that they can only be seen under a microscope. Types of bacteria. There are thousands of different kinds of bacteria which fall into two primary types, pathogenic and non-pathogenic. Most bacteria are non-pathogenic. So remember, we learned that pathogenic means bad or harmful. So non-pathogenic is the exact opposite. It is either neutral or it's actually good. Most bacteria is either good for us or just neutral. So I think a lot of times we have a bad association with bacteria, but it is so critical to our skin, to our bodies, to our gut microbiome, to everything. We need good bacteria in order to function and be healthy. Most bacteria are non-pathogenic, harmless organisms that may perform useful functions. They are safe to come in contact with since they do not cause disease or harm. For example, non-pathogenic organisms are used to make yogurt, cheese, and some medicines. In the human body, non-pathogenic bacteria help the body break down food, protect against infection, and stimulate the immune system. Pathogenic bacteria are harmful microorganisms that cause disease or infection in humans when they invade the body. Bacterial infections. There can be no bacterial infection without the presence of pathogenic bacteria. Therefore, if pathogenic bacteria are eliminated, clients cannot become infected. Inflammation is a condition in which the tissue of the body reacts to injury, irritation, or infection. Inflammation is characterized by redness, heat, pain, and/or swelling. Pus is a fluid containing white blood cells, bacteria, and dead cells, and is the byproduct of the infectious process. The presence of pus is a sign of bacterial infection. We're going to see this later on when we look at acne in future chapters. Whenever you see this specific type of acne lesion is called a pustule. Those are those raised pimples that are red on the surrounding area, red and inflamed and usually painful, but then they're white at the head or the tip. That is pus that you're seeing. And like we just learned, pus contains white blood cells, and our white blood cells work to fight off infections. So they've sensed something is wrong, and they come to try to alleviate the issue. A local infection, such as a pimple or abscess, is confined to a particular part of the body and appears as a lesion containing pus. A systemic infection is an infection where the pathogen has spread through the body rather than staying in one area or organ. And I do have a way to help you remember systemic infection. A systemic infection, like we just said, goes throughout the entire body or our system. It goes through our whole system. MRSA. Staphylococci are among the most common bacteria that affect humans and are routinely found in our environment. Staph bacteria in the salon and spa are most frequently spread through skin-to-skin contact, pedicure bowls, or the use of unclean tools or implements. Staph is responsible for food poisoning and a wide range of diseases, including toxic shock syndrome and some flesh-eating diseases. Some types of infectious staph bacteria are highly resistant to conventional treatments such as antibiotics. As an example, MRSA, or methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, that's a mouthful. Clients who appear completely healthy may bring this organism into the shop with them, often unwittingly, where it can affect others. In general, MRSA initially appears as a skin infection, resulting in pimples, rashes, or boils that can be difficult to cure. Without proper treatment, the infection becomes systemic and can have devastating consequences, even resulting in death. I know these infections are scary. Don't worry. In all my time as an esthetician, I've never come across someone with MRSA. So, yeah. But one thing I want to mention about Staphylococci or staph, you may have heard of somebody having a staph infection. One of the ways this can happen is by sharing makeup brushes with somebody. I actually learned about nobody that I know, it was just like a news story or something like that. A girl shared her makeup brushes with her friend, and I believe she got staph, and I hope I'm remembering this right. I think she lost her eye or lost vision in her eye. So just be on the safe side. I don't ever share makeup brushes with people. Mycobacterium is the name for a large family of bacteria that is often found in soil and water. In recent years, it has been linked to disfiguring infections associated particularly with pedicure bowls. In addition to diligent infection control, it is also important that both you and your client keep your skin intact and protected. Avoid cracked skin by using lotions frequently, particularly in the winter months. Advise clients not to okay, this doesn't matter. We're not nail techs. Viruses. I'm going to take a sip of my water because my voice gets real strained after I talk for a while. Okay, viruses. A virus is a submicroscopic particle that infects and resides in the cells of a biological organism. Viruses are so small that they can only be seen under the most sophisticated and powerful microscopes. So I know we learned bacteria are small, viruses are even smaller. Some of the viruses that plague humans are measles, mumps, chickenpox, smallpox, rabies, yellow fever, hepatitis, polio, influenza, HIV, which causes AIDS, and the common cold. One difference between viruses and bacteria is that a virus can live and reproduce only by taking over other cells and becoming part of them, while bacteria can live and reproduce on their own. Another difference is that while bacterial infections can usually be treated with specific antibiotics, viral infections cannot. Also, viruses are hard to kill without harming the host cells in the process. Although we cannot cure viruses, we can often prevent contracting and spreading them through the use of vaccines. Along with vaccines, hand washing and disinfection are your best defense against becoming sick with a virus. Incubation and containment. Many viruses remain dormant for months to years following exposure, but most produce signs of illness within 10 to 14 days. Unfortunately, in most cases, a person is highly contagious in the days just before symptoms appear. Containment is achieved when those who are ill stay home until their symptoms resolve to the extent that they are no longer contagious. HPV and HSV are two highly contagious viruses that can be transmitted both directly and indirectly. Both of these viruses can be spread through skin-to-skin contact and are often thought of as sexually transmitted diseases. However, both viruses can also be spread from person to person indirectly through items like a wax pot. I have a crazy story for you about that in a second. Because the majority of people infected with these viruses have no symptoms, it is even more important to follow good infection control procedures with all procedures that may involve contact with blood and fluids. Okay, side story here, because you're going to want to hear this. This is crazy. We're going to learn later in this course all about waxing and how to be sanitary with our waxing. The most important thing is to never double dip your wax stick in the wax pot. So for example, picking up your stick, dipping it in the wax, touching that stick and that wax to the client, and then putting it back in, huge no. A huge no. And that gets even more important when we're talking about waxing private areas, of course. So here's my crazy story. The first class I ever taught in my life, I was teaching this about how a person can get an STD through a wax pot, where it was somebody else double dipped and they had an STD and now it spread to this innocent, unassuming person. So I'm teaching this, and one of my students was like just had the biggest epiphany, and she was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell you guys a story. She was like, 20 years ago, I got chlamydia, and I did not cheat on my husband, and he obviously didn't believe me. And I was never able to explain it, and it almost ruined our marriage, because why would he believe? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we think of, oh, well, that's the only way you can get it. So this put so much strain on the relationship for like 20 years. And she just realized that it must have been the wax pot because she got waxed around that time. Is that not the craziest thing you've ever heard? So, the moral of that story is no double dipping. Oh my goodness. More viruses. Hepatitis and HIV/AIDS. Bloodborne pathogens are disease-causing microorganisms that are carried in the body by blood or body fluids. In the salon, spa, or barbershop, the spread of bloodborne pathogens is possible whenever the skin is broken. Hepatitis is a bloodborne virus that causes disease and can damage the liver. In general, it's difficult to contract hepatitis. However, it is easier to contract than HIV because it can be present in all body fluids of those who are infected. In addition, unlike HIV, hepatitis can live on a surface outside the body for long periods of time. HIV causes acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS. AIDS is a disease that breaks down the body's immune system. HIV is spread from person to person through blood and less often through other bodily fluids, such as semen and vaginal secretions. A person can be infected with HIV for many years without showing symptoms. Some people who are HIV positive have never been tested and do not know they have the potential to infect others. If you accidentally cut a client's skin, the tool will be contaminated with whatever might be in the client's blood, including bloodborne pathogens. You should not continue to use the implement without cleaning and disinfecting it. Fungi. This is a fun picture. Fungi are single-celled organisms that grow in irregular masses that include molds, mildews, and yeasts. Mildew, another fungus, affects plants or grows on inanimate objects but does not cause human infections in the salon or spa. The most frequently encountered fungal infection resulting from hair service is Tinea barbae, also known as barber's itch. Got a hint for you here, moving forward in this class. Anytime something starts with tinea, that is a fungus or a fungal infection. So we're going to see Tinea capitis down here, all kinds of tinea. That always means a fungus. Tinea barbae is similar to Tinea capitis, a fungal infection of the scalp characterized by red papules or spots at the opening of the hair follicle. Ringworm, a fungal infection of the skin that appears in circular lesions, is another fungus that may contraindicate a beauty service. While all beauty professionals must avoid spreading scalp and skin infections, the increased risk for hair services in particular can be reduced. Okay, we're not hairstylists here, so I'm going to just skip over that part. Parasites. Parasites are organisms that grow, feed, and shelter on or inside of another organism, referred to as the host, while contributing nothing to the survival of that organism. Parasites can live on or inside of humans and animals. They also can be found in food, on plants and trees, and in water. External parasites that affect humans by way of skin include ticks, lice, fleas, and mites. Services should never be performed on a customer with visible signs of a parasitic infection. There are two types of parasites commonly encountered in the salon and spa. Head lice are a type of parasite responsible for contagious diseases and conditions. And scabies is a contagious disease caused by the itch mite, which burrows under the skin. So again, I know we're learning about a ton of different infections and diseases and crazy stuff here. It is not common that you run across this. I remember being in school learning about contraindications, learning about diseases and stuff, and thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be like an everyday thing. Like every other person I come in contact with is going to have some type of, it's really not as common as this makes it seem. It's just that we have to be aware and always vigilant and on the lookout for these things in case it does pop up. That's not a reason to let your guard down thinking it'll never happen to me. I'm just saying I also don't want the other extreme, which you're hyper paranoid, worried that every person is going to have something, because it's really not super common, at least in my practice, and I've been an esthetician for over 5 years. So and lastly, we're going to talk about biofilms. Biofilms are colonies of microorganisms that adhere to environmental surfaces as well as the human body. They secrete a sticky, hard to penetrate protective coating that cements them together. The biofilm grows into a complex structure with many kinds of microbes. Biofilm communities are very hard to pierce with antiseptics, antimicrobials, and disinfection, ultimately keeping the body in a chronic inflammatory state that is painful and inhibits healing. One action of the biofilm community is to resist the body's defense mechanisms. We are learning that biofilms play a large role in disease and infection. Biofilms are not usually visible and must grow very large to be seen without a microscope. Sorry, I lost my place. Dental plaque is an example of a visible human biofilm, and algae colonies on ponds and slime and drains are examples of visible environmental biofilms. In the beauty wellness world, foot spas can harbor biofilm and require extra attention, especially piped models. Employing the principles of prevention. Proper infection control requires 2 steps. 1, cleaning, and 2, disinfecting with an appropriate EPA-registered disinfectant. Again, you have to do it in this order. If there's particles and junk on the item that you haven't cleaned before disinfecting, those items get in the way of proper disinfection. When these 2 steps are followed correctly, virtually all pathogens of concern can be effectively eliminated. Sterilization, which is the process that destroys all microbial life, including spores, can be incorporated but is rarely mandated. So like I said earlier, we're not required to go as far as sterilization, but you certainly may. Effective sterilization typically requires the use of an autoclave, a piece of equipment that incorporates heat and pressure. For sterilization to be effective, items must be cleaned prior to use and the autoclave must be tested and maintained as instructed in the manufacturer's specifications. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, requires that autoclaves be tested monthly to ensure they are properly sterilizing the implements. The accepted method is called a spore test. Sealed packages containing test organisms are subjected to a typical sterilization cycle and then sent to a contract laboratory that specializes in autoclave performance testing. Step 1, cleaning. Cleaning involves removing all visible and surface dirt and debris from tools, implements, and equipment by washing them with liquid soap or detergent and warm water, and using a clean and disinfected brush to scrub any grooved or hinged portions of the item. So I like to use a nail brush like the one pictured here. These bristles really help to get in any of the grooves of the item. Proper cleaning removes surface contaminants and any oils or residues from items that may interfere with disinfecting properly. A surface must be properly cleaned before it is properly disinfected. Using a disinfectant without cleaning first is like using mouthwash without brushing your teeth. It just doesn't work properly. Clean surfaces can still harbor small amounts of pathogens, but the presence of fewer pathogens means infections are less likely to be spread. Applying antiseptics to your skin or washing your hands with soap and water will drastically lower the number of pathogens on your hands. Do not underestimate underestimate proper cleaning and hand washing. They are the most powerful and important ways to prevent the spread of infection. There are 3 ways to clean your tools and implements: washing with soap and warm water and then scrubbing them with a clean and properly disinfected brush, using an ultrasonic unit, and using a chemical cleaner. I highly recommend the first option, just hand washing with a nail brush and warm soapy water, and then rinsing thoroughly, and then placing in your disinfectant, which is usually barbicide. Properly washing your hands is one of the most important actions you can take to prevent spreading germs from one person to another. Proper hand washing removes germs from the folds and grooves of the skin and from under the free edge of the nail plate by lifting and rinsing germs and contaminants from the surface of your skin. You should wash your hands thoroughly before and after working with each client. Follow the hand washing procedure described in the next slide. Oh, maybe it's not described in the next slide. JK. Okay, hand washing. Antibacterial soaps. In 2016, many of the chemicals used in antibacterial and antimicrobial soaps were banned by the FDA. Research has shown that repeated use of antibacterial products can actually increase the growth of some of the worst pathogens. Repeated hand washing can also dry the skin, so using a moisturizing hand lotion after washing is a good practice. Antiseptics are chemical germicides formulated for use on the skin and are registered and regulated by the FDA. Antiseptics generally contain a high volume of alcohol and are intended to reduce the numbers and slow the growth of microbes on the skin. When there is visible dirt or debris on the hands, neither waterless hand sanitizers nor antiseptics will work until the dirt and debris is removed. This can be accomplished only with liquid soap, a soft bristle brush, and water. Common antiseptics examples can be hydrogen peroxide and isopropyl alcohol. Step 2, disinfecting. Disinfection is extremely effective in controlling microorganisms on non-porous surfaces, such as shears, clippers, and other multi-use tools and equipment. Multi-use refers to items that can be cleaned, disinfected, and used on more than one person. So these would be all non-porous items. Never use disinfectants as hand cleaners, since this can cause skin irritation and allergy. Disinfectants are pesticides and can be harmful if absorbed through the skin. Choosing a disinfectant. You must read and follow the manufacturer's instructions whenever you're using a disinfectant. Mixing ratios or dilution and contact time, which is the time as listed on the product label required for the disinfectant to be visibly moist to be effective against pathogens, are very important and can vary widely based on manufacturer and delivery method. Not all disinfectants have the same concentration, so be sure to mix the correct portions according to the instructions on the label. Disinfectants must have efficacy claims on the label. Efficacy is the ability to produce the intended effect. I know this is a funny word. We usually see it and think it says efficiency, or maybe think it's a typo, but the word is efficacy. This will be an important vocab word to know. Proper use of disinfectants. Implements must be thoroughly cleaned of all visible matter or residue before being placed in the disinfectant solution. Complete immersion means that there is enough liquid in the container to cover all surfaces of the item being used. That's important. It has to be completely submerged and not sticking out at all. For most disinfectant solutions, you're supposed to immerse them for 10 minutes so that they can properly remove all the intended bacteria. When using spray, wipe, or an aerosol disinfectant, you must still look for and adhere to the contact time to ensure all pathogens on the label are being effectively destroyed. As a beauty professional, you'll primarily be using disinfectants that are effective for cleaning blood and bodily fluids from non-porous surfaces. Non-porous items are made of a material that has no pores or openings and that cannot absorb liquids, as opposed to porous material that has holes or openings that is absorbent. Think about sponges again, like SpongeBob. Absorbent and yellow and porous is he. Quats. So these are different types of infectants. I always just go with Barbicide, tried and true, but we'll still talk about these anyway because it's in our book. Starting with quats. Quats are disinfectants that are very effective when used properly on non-porous surfaces. The most advanced type of these formulations is called multiple quats. Quat solutions usually disinfect implements in 10 minutes. The item should be removed from the solution after the specified period to avoid dulling or damage. This is very true of Barbicide for sure. If you leave an item in, it's not like anything is going to happen if you leave it like a few minutes over, or even I've noticed like most of my supplies if I leave a few hours, but you're not going to want to leave it like overnight. Especially like fan brushes, etc. That can really hurt your bristles. But a comedone extractor, anything metal or like stainless steel, usually holds up to it pretty well, but you don't want to leave it overnight or for hours or for any extended period of time past the 10-minute requirement or whatever the time on the manufacturer's instructions are, because it can really erode the material and wear it out over time. Tuberculocidal disinfectants. Tuberculocidal disinfectants are proven to kill the bacterium that causes tuberculosis, in addition to other pathogens destroyed through the use of hospital disinfectants. And phenolic disinfectants are powerful disinfectants, but just because these disinfectants are effective doesn't mean that you should automatically reach for them. They have been used reliably over the years to disinfect tools, however, they do have significant drawbacks. Most states have removed them from the requirements due to the risks outweighing the benefits. The manufacturers are ceasing their production. We also have bleach. This is an effective disinfectant that's been used extensively in salons and spas. Chlorine bleach is the only bleach that disinfects, so it is wise to always look for disinfection instruction on the label to make sure the bleach you use is actually disinfecting. Bleach is corrosive and can damage metals and plastics, as well as cause skin irritation and eye damage. To mix a bleach solution, always follow manufacturer's directions. So bleach can also be irritating to the lungs. I don't use bleach. I like the smell of it at first, but if it's like been sitting on a surface for a minute, then I don't like the smell. It's really irritating. If you touch it, it's so drying to your skin, and obviously it bleaches everything, so if you accidentally get it on something, it's going to turn it white. So I personally am not a huge fan, but I do think it has its place, like cleaning bathrooms. Heck yes. Disinfectant tips and safety. Always keep the SDS, and what does that stand for? Safety data sheets, handy for the disinfectants you use. Wear gloves and safety glasses. Avoid skin and eye contact. Add disinfectant to the water when diluting to prevent foaming. Okay, let me break this down for a second. This is talking about the order of which to do things. We know that we have to mix the disinfectant concentrate with water, but it's saying add the water first and then the disinfectant rather than the other way around. If you add the disinfectant first and then the water, it makes it bubble up and foam. And that can just really just mess with our ability to see how much we've put in there, because it kind of foams up and then we can't see like what we're doing as well. Use tongs, gloves, or a draining basket to remove implements from disinfectants. Keep them out of reach of children, and always follow manufacturer's instructions. And also make sure when you're removing your implements, wash them super thoroughly. Rinse, I should say, rinse, not wash. Especially your fan brushes, because the solution can kind of hide in the bristles. And what do you think might happen if we didn't rinse out all the barbicide and then we're using it on a client when we're brushing on their mask or whatever we're putting on them? If there's still barbicide on it, it can irritate their skin. So we want to make sure we're rinsing very, very thoroughly. Always disinfect only on clean, hard, non-porous surfaces. Use the contact time, again, usually 10 minutes, but always follow manufacturer's instructions on your specific disinfectant. Make sure everything's completely immersed. Larger surfaces should remain moist for 10 minutes or whatever's indicated on the instructions, and replace your disinfectant daily. Never contact disinfectant, immediately wash if so. Place disinfectant in an unmarked container. That is a big violation right there. We can't, for example, pour our barbicide into a water jug and not label it as barbicide. It's important that it has the original label on it. And never mix chemicals unless specified. Disinfecting containers. In the past, jars or containers used to disinfect implements were often incorrectly called wet sanitizers. Disinfecting containers contain disinfectant for disinfecting purposes, not for cleaning. The container you choose must be large enough to contain all items to be disinfected and covered but not airtight. So if it's hard for you to picture this, let me just go back up a few slides. It's just talking about this barbicide container. So the actual solution will come in a jug, and it'll have the instructions on it, the label, etc. And then you'll use a container like here to actually mix the concentrate with water, and this is what you'll immerse your supplies in. So that's what it means by choosing your container. Remember to clean the container every day and to wear gloves when you do. Always follow the label's instructions for disinfecting products. Salons and spas should always follow manufacturer's recommended schedules for cleaning and disinfecting tools and implements. Disinfecting work surfaces, scheduling regular service visits for equipment, and replacing parts when needed. Although your state may not require you to keep a logbook of all equipment usage, it may be advisable to keep one. Disinfecting electrical tools and equipment. Electrical equipment has contact points that cannot be completely immersed in liquid. These items should be cleaned and disinfected using an EPA-registered disinfectant designed for use on these devices. Let me give you a good example. Something we're going to use in this class would be your ultrasonic spatulas for facial cleansing and for extractions. Those get plugged in. It's obviously a device that turns on and off, so you wouldn't want to immerse it in a liquid or it's going to break. So the way that I disinfect them is through Cavicide wipes. That way we're not submerging it and getting like the charging port or the buttons or anything electric in submerged in a liquid. Cleaning linens. Clean towels and linens should be used for each client, and some states require freshly laundered capes for every service. To clean towels, linens, and capes, launder according to the directions on the item's label. Be sure that towels, linens, and capes are thoroughly dried. Items that are not dry may grow mildew and bacteria. Store soiled linens and towels in covered and closed containers away from clean linens and towels, even if your state regulatory agency does not require that you do so. When using creams, lotions, gels, or any other product that is dispensed from a multi-use container, it's important not to contaminate the product. Always use a pump or shaker to dispense products when possible. So for example, jars, this is something I'll get into much later, but jars are not the most sanitary for products because every time you open it, for one thing, it's exposed to a lot of air, a lot of dust, whatever's floating around in the air, and people usually dip their fingers into it, adding bacteria to the product each time they use it. So pumps and tubes are much more sanitary. Soaps and detergents. Chelating soaps, also known as chelating detergents, work to break down stubborn films and remove the residue of products such as scrubs, salts, and masks. The agents in these soaps work in all types of water, are low sudsing, and especially formulated to work in areas with hard tap water. Standard precautions. This is a huge one I want you to focus on. Very, very important vocab word. It's absolutely 100% going to come up on tests. Standard precautions are guidelines published by the CDC that require the employer and employee to assume that any human blood and body fluids are potentially infectious. Because it may not be possible to identify clients with infectious diseases, strict infection control practices should be used with all clients. In many instances, clients who are just getting sick or are long-term viral carriers are asymptomatic, meaning that they show no symptoms or signs of infection. OSHA and the CDC have set safety standards and precautions that protect employees in situations when they could be exposed to bloodborne pathogens. Precautions include proper hand washing, wearing of gloves, and proper handling and disposing of sharp instruments and other items that may have been contaminated by blood or other bodily fluids. So, a summary of standard precautions is because we never truly know what somebody may have, because either they're asymptomatic, maybe they didn't fill out their form correctly, maybe they knew they had something and didn't say anything. We have to treat every client like they are contagious. So, with their bodily fluids, and not even just blood, but oil that comes out of their pores, any type of pus or excretions when we're doing extractions. And something that comes up on tests as an example of standard precautions is wearing gloves when doing a service where it's reasonable to anticipate contact with bodily fluids. So like waxing and extractions, for example. So that falls under standard precautions. Gloves. OSHA defines PPEs, which is personal protective equipment, as specialized clothing or equipment worn by an employee for protection against a hazard. The hazards this particular standard refers to are bloodborne pathogens such as hepatitis and HIV. However, beauty professionals are required to prevent their occupational exposure to any amount of blood, no matter how minuscule, through the use of gloves, masks, and eye protection. Gloves are single-use equipment, and a new set is used for every client, and at times must be changed during the service according to the protocol. So this is the proper removal of gloves. It's hard to explain unless I'm actually showing it to you, But proper removal of gloves is performed by inverting the cuff of one glove, pulling it off inside out, and holding it in the other gloved hand. The glove with the cuff inverted is then pulled over the first glove inside out. So, in other words, you're taking one hand, grabbing the glove on one hand, pulling it off your hand inside out, and then you're holding that glove in your other gloved hand. You're then taking the glove off that hand, and when that glove comes inside out, the first glove is inside that one. I don't know if that makes any sense or if you're able to visualize it, but the reason we take it off that way is because we're turning the gloves inside out, so when we touch them, we're not actually touching the outside of the glove that is contaminated. Handling an exposure incident, client injury. You should never perform a service on any client who comes in with an open wound, rash, or abrasion. However, sometimes accidents happen while a service is being performed. An exposure incident is contact with non-intact or broken skin, blood, body fluid, or other potentially infectious materials that is the result of the performance of a worker's duties. Should the client suffer a cut or abrasion that bleeds during a service, follow the outlined steps for the client's safety as well as your own. As a beauty professional, you'll likely work with an array of sharp implements and tools, and cutting yourself is a very real possibility. If you do suffer a cut and blood is present, you must follow the steps for an exposure incident. Many of the steps are similar to a client injury, although attending to yourself should hopefully require fewer soft skills. Demonstrate safe work practices and safety precautions. Water. Wipe up any water spills or leaks immediately. Water heaters should not be set at higher than 130 degrees. Always test water and steam towel temperature on the inside of your wrist before applying to the client. This is something that comes up during facials. So you have your hot towel cabinet to keep your towels warm. They can get real hot in there. So we're always going to shake out the towel a little bit, shake out some excess heat and steam, and test the temperature on the inside of our own wrist before applying it to the client. Tools and appliances. Smaller tools may be placed in countertop receptacles designed for that purpose. Larger equipment may be mounted under the cabinet, attached to a wall, or set on a shelf. Okay, sorry. These are more specifically for barbering. This first book, like the Foundations book, is not 100% specific to aesthetics. It's a smaller book that precedes the aesthetics book, and so it talks about general topics like life skills, communicating with clients, being professional, electric and electrical safety, chemicals, infection control, all that stuff. So that's why some of this mentions barbers, because barbers use this book for their curriculum as well. So every now and then you're going to see some things that aren't applicable to you. Equipment and fixtures. Keep all chairs, headrests, tables, heat lamps, and light fixtures in good working order. Dust and clean regularly to avoid dust buildup and maintain clean conditions. Maintain light fixtures and change bulbs when necessary. Proper ventilation and air circulation are very important in today's salons and spas. Particles from products such as hairsprays and disinfectants can be inhaled and may cause allergic reactions and other health problems. Ventilation is definitely important. Wherever you work, this would be the responsibility of the owner or the manager, unless you have your own salon studio. And then you will have to take that into consideration. But changing filters is something that's really important, so we're getting proper ventilation. Exits should be well marked and identifiable. Employees should know where the exits are located and how to evacuate the building quickly in case of fire or other emergencies. Fire extinguishers should be placed where they are readily accessible. All employees should be instructed in fire extinguisher use. It is a law that fire extinguishers be checked periodically. Clothing should be comfortable and professional in appearance. Keep long hair pulled back or short enough to avoid entanglements. Necklaces should be of appropriate length so as to not get caught on equipment or dangle in a client's face during a service. Rings should not be worn, I would say on any finger when we're talking about facials for sure, because sanitation purposes, but also your client feels every little thing when it comes to your hands and your movements. So I would do no rings 100%. And shoes should have a non-skid rubber sole with good support. Be aware of children's inquisitive nature and the speed with which they can move to help prevent accidents from happening. Post notices in the reception area advising patrons that children are not to be left unattended. Some places also don't allow children at all, just for their own safety and safety of everyone around them, because especially during a facial, for example, the client cannot watch their child, so it makes it difficult and just distracting for everybody. Do not allow children to play, climb, or spin on hydraulic chairs or chairs that have wheels. Do not allow children to wander freely into workstations, and never trust a young child to hold their head or body still while you are wielding tools. Adult clients. Assist clients, especially the elderly, in and out of chairs and on and off treatment tables. Hold doors open for clients. Assist clients in walking whenever necessary. Always support the back of the chair and thus the client when reclining or raising a chair back. Support the client's head whenever appropriate see, here we go with that darn shampoo bowl again. High-risk clients. We are almost there. A few more slides. Customers with impaired immune systems are at a very high risk of infection, and should they encounter pathogens, although they may not tell you that they are. Diabetic customers have immune systems that do not work effectively and have impaired healing. A simple nick from a tool that was not properly disinfected may have devastating effects. While many people will tell you that they have diabetes if they do, some type 2 diabetics can be diabetic for years prior to being diagnosed, which means that even if you ask, they may say no because they've not yet been diagnosed. Lumpectomy and mastectomy patients have had surgical treatment for breast cancer. With the lymph nodes of their arm removed, any infectious process that could harm in the arm that could lead to a permanent condition called lymphedema. It is extremely important to these clients that proper disinfected implements be used, particularly in a nail service. Clients on medication for conditions such as asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, and fibromyalgia are likely to have suppressed immune systems, making them particularly susceptible to infection. Clients who are pregnant may be particularly sensitive to harsh smells, and their skin may also have unusual reactions to chemicals. Each client must decide for themselves what is safe for their baby during pregnancy. However, allowing a client to read the labels or products prior to use may help them to decide. It's also important with certain procedures, and we'll get into this later on, that they have permission from their doctor as well. Your professional responsibilities. Never take shortcuts for cleaning and disinfecting. You cannot afford to skip steps or save money when it comes to safety. It is your professional and legal responsibility to follow state and federal laws and rules. Keep your license current and notify the licensing agency if you move or change your name. Check your state's website monthly for any change or update to the rules and regulations. Be aware of your environment so you can identify and eliminate potential hazards to make your salon or spa safer for you and your clients. Be prepared for emergencies. Every salon and spa should have employee and clientele emergency information available. An emergency phone number checklist could include the contact numbers for fire, police, poison control, and medical rescue departments, the nearest hospital emergency room, and taxis. Utility service companies such as electricity, water, heat, air conditioning, and landlord or custodial numbers are also helpful in an emergency or if something breaks down in the shop. Update this information on an annual basis and you'll always be prepared. Realize that behavior that stems from a knowledgeable and caring manner is what separates a true professional from a non-professional. We have done it. We've reached the end. I hope this was helpful for everybody. Like I said at the beginning, infection control is of utmost importance at all times, especially on our state board exams. The number one thing they watch for in your practical is proper infection control. Safety and sanitation always. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.